There is a particular kind of silence that lives only in the deepest archives, far from the light and noise of the world above. It is a heavy silence, pressed into form by the weight of centuries, composed of dust, dried clay, and the latent breath of those who made the first marks. We are in such a place now, not a library for stories, but a vault for accounts. Before us, under a low, warm light, lies not a book but a fragment of one. It is a piece of baked earth, no larger than a human hand, covered in the precise wedge-shaped script of a world that has long since turned to dust. It is an administrative record from the dawn of what we call history, and it holds a number that should not exist. A number that quietly breaks the foundation of the story we have always told ourselves about who we are and where we came from. The object is known as the Sumerian King List. There are more than a dozen copies, some nearly complete, others mere shards, all found scattered across the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia. They are not epic poems. They are not religious scripture in the way we understand it. Their tone is dispassionate, methodical, even mundane. They are bureaucratic documents, designed to establish legitimacy, to create an unbroken chain of command stretching back into the deepest antiquity. The scribes who copied and maintained these lists were not poets. They were civil servants. Their task was to record, to catalog, to ensure the orderly transfer of power from one ruler to the next. They were the keepers of the official record, and their work was defined by its precision and its adherence to a rigid, unvarying format that was maintained for over 1,000 years. We begin where the list begins, in the city of Eridu, a place the Sumerians believed was the first city on Earth. The text is unambiguous. It states, "After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu." It then names the first king, Alulim, and records the length of his reign. The scribe, with the same detached neutrality he would later use to document a shipment of barley or a sale of livestock, carved a number into the wet clay. The number is 28,800, 28,800 years. This is not presented as a metaphor. It is not framed by mythic language. It is entered as a simple administrative fact, the first entry in a long and meticulously kept ledger of global stewardship. A single ruler presiding over the first city, for a length of time that defies every category we have for human history. One can almost feel the presence of the researcher, centuries removed from the original scribe, yet bound to him by this strange object. A gloved hand steadies the tablet under the lamp's focused beam. The air in the room is sterile, climate-controlled, a stark contrast to the sun-scorched earth from which this fragment was pulled. There is no grand discovery here, no sudden revelation. There is only the slow, methodical work of verification, comparing this fragment to another, noting the consistency of the impossible figures, cataloging the precise location of the find, the stratum of earth it occupied, the other objects it was buried with. It is a quiet, patient process of acknowledging the existence of something that makes no sense, of giving it a catalog number and a place in a drawer, a piece of data that refuses to fit. The anomaly does not stand alone. After Alulim, the list continues with the same unnerving calm. Alalangar ruled for 36,000 years. It then provides a summary. 2 kings, they ruled for 64,800 years. The kingship then moves to another city, Bad Tibira, and the pattern persists. 3 more kings are listed, their reigns recorded as 28,800 years, 43,200 years, and 21,000 years, respectively. The scribe totals them up with the same administrative finality. 5 kings in 2 cities, with a combined rule of 241,200 years. The numbers are presented without apology or explanation. They are not random. They follow a strange internal logic, often being multiples of a base 60 system. This was not the work of a fantasist. This was the work of a bureaucracy, an organization documenting its own history with a clarity that borders on the impossible. What does it mean to record a history that is, by our standards, impossible. The language of the king list is the language of contracts, of legal succession. It tracks the transfer of an asset, the kingship, from one location to another, from one ruler to the next. It is profoundly concerned with order, legitimacy, and continuity. This was not a document for public consumption. It was an internal record for the ruling administration. The scribe who etched these lines was not attempting to inspire faith or awe. He was, by all indications, simply doing his job, updating the ledger, maintaining the official timeline, and documenting a chain of custody that began long before the first human cities were ever built. The sheer administrative nature of the text forces a difficult question. What if he was recording a reality he simply took for granted? The wind moves across the plains of southern Iraq, carrying fine particles of sand that once formed the walls and temples of these first cities. Here, at the site of ancient Eridu, there is almost nothing left to see. The ziggurat has eroded into a low, indistinct mound. The outlines of buildings are faint suggestions in the soil, visible only at sunrise when the shadows are long. It is a landscape of profound absence. Yet it was from this dust that the tablets emerged. The connection between this empty space and the sterile archive room thousands of miles away is absolute. The silence here is different from the silence of the museum. It is the silence of abandonment, of a system that was established, operated for an unimaginable length of time, and then simply ceased to be. The records remain, but the world they describe is gone. The list continues, moving from city to city, king to king, until it reaches a single, stark sentence that serves as a boundary marker between two distinct epochs of existence. After chronicling the reigns of 8 kings over 5 cities for 250,000 years, the scribe makes a simple, declarative entry. Then the flood swept over. There is no story, no theological explanation, no description of the cataclysm. It is presented as an administrative event, a clean break in the timeline, the end of one fiscal period, and the beginning of another. This is not the familiar story of divine punishment and moral failure. In the cold, bureaucratic language of the king list, the Great Flood is treated as a line drawn across the page, a fundamental reset of the entire system of governance. After that line, everything changes. The scribe continues his list with the same methodical tone, but the data is transformed. After the flood had swept over, when the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kish, a new city, a new beginning. The kings who rule now have reigns that are still long, but they are recognizably human. A few hundred years, then 100, then decades. The impossible numbers vanish from the record, replaced by a plausible, human-scale history. The transition is sudden and absolute. The list itself presents us with 2 completely different realities, one before the flood and one after, separated by that single quiet statement. The document does not ask us to believe in gods or myths. It asks us to look at the numbers and acknowledge a change so profound it severed the world in 2. We are not the first to stand here in this silence, holding a fragment that feels heavier than its weight in clay. There is a quiet fellowship that gathers in these spaces, a shared recognition that some questions are not meant to be answered, only to be held with care. To remain here, watching, is to accept that the story of our past may be stranger and far more complex than we have ever been told. It is an acknowledgement that the oldest records may not be the myths of our ancestors, but the carefully preserved administrative files of our predecessors. And so, we remain. We keep watch, because the first question has been asked, and it now hangs in the air, unanswered. The work of the scribe was not to interpret. It was to copy. His stylus, a sharpened reed, moved across the damp clay with a practiced economy of motion, each wedge a precise imprint of a received tradition. He was a link in a chain of transmission that stretched back into a time he could not personally remember, but was institutionally obligated to preserve. The document before us is the result of that discipline. It is cold, repetitive, and structured. It is a list. And its function is not to inspire, but to certify an unbroken sequence of authority. The weight we feel is not the weight of myth. It is the weight of a ledger, a formal accounting of a possession so profound it was simply called the kingship. The scribe's task was to track its movement and its tenure, nothing more. His silence on the nature of the data is the most unsettling detail of all. The ledger begins with an entry for the city of Eridu. The line is not poetic. It is geographic and procedural. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. This establishes the starting point of the accounting period. The next line assigns the asset to its first holder. In Eridu, Alulim became king. Then comes the first numerical entry, the duration of the tenure. The scribe records that Alulim ruled for 8 sars. A sar is a Sumerian unit of time equal to 600 years. The scribe does the calculation for us, noting the reign as 800 years. It is written with the same dispassionate clarity as one might record the shelf life of stored grain or the dimensions of a freshly surveyed field. It is the first transaction in a very long account. The record continues without a change in tone. After Alulim, the asset of kingship was transferred to a successor in the same city. Alalangar ruled for 36 years, 10 sars. The number is larger, but the formula for its recording is identical. The scribe then closes the entry for the first city with a summary, a subtotal for the Eridu period. 2 kings, they ruled for 800 years. This act of summation is critical. It transforms the individual entries from potential anomalies into a verified set of data points within a larger, coherent system of accounting. The scribe is not just listing names and numbers. He is balancing the books for an entire epoch of governance, confirming the totals before moving on to the next section of the ledger. The next entry notes a transfer of the central authority. Then Eridu was defeated, and the kingship was taken to Bad Tibira. The language is that of a corporate relocation, or the shifting of a regional administrative headquarters. The asset is now logged at a new location. In Bad Tibira, 3 rulers are listed in sequence. Enmen-Luana, who ruled for 200 years. Then Enmen-Gal-Ana, who ruled for 800 years. Finally, Dumuzid, the shepherd, whose tenure is recorded as 36 years. The scribe again provides a subtotal for the city's period of authority. The pattern is rigid, the repetition hypnotic. It is the rhythm of bureaucracy, a steady, unblinking cataloging of immense periods of time, as if they were ordinary fiscal years. There is a strange quietness to the list. No mention is made of the lives of these kings, their deeds, their families, or their deaths. They are not characters in a story. They are names assigned to a block of time, holders of an office. The scribe's focus is solely on the continuity of the institution itself, the kingship. The silence between the names is vast, filled only by the silent accumulation of millennia. Reading the list is like watching a star chart where the immense distances between celestial bodies are noted with mathematical precision, but the nature of the worlds themselves is left entirely to the imagination. The record is concerned only with position and duration, the 2 fundamental coordinates of official history. The numbers themselves are not arbitrary. They are not the wild exaggerations of a storyteller. They are products of a sophisticated mathematical system, the sexagesimal base 60 system, that the Sumerians used for everything from astronomy to commerce. The reign lengths are almost always multiples of 60, and often multiples of 600, ner, or 600, sa'ar. This internal mathematical logic is perhaps the most disturbing element. A fantasist might invent random, impossibly large numbers. A bureaucrat, however, documents according to a system. The scribe was not inventing. He was transcribing data from an older source, using the established mathematical conventions of his time. He was processing information that adhered to a pre-existing logical structure. The administrative transfer continues. Then Bad Tibira was defeated, and the kingship was taken to Larak. The process repeats with the same procedural formality. In Larak, a single ruler is named, Ensipad Zid Ana. His reign is recorded as 28th, 800 years. 8 Sars. The same number that appeared for the very first king in Eridu. This recurrence is significant. It suggests a standardized unit of time or a specific type of cycle being recorded. The consistency of the impossible figures across different cities and different rulers reinforces the idea that this is not a collection of disparate myths, but a single, unified document describing one continuous system of governance. The scribe is not the author of the data, only its curator. The ledger then tracks the kingship to the city of Sipar, a major center for the worship of the sun god, Utu. Here, another single king is listed, Enmendur-Ana. His reign is recorded as 21,000 years. The number is different, but the format of the entry is identical. The city, the name, the duration. By this point in the document, the reader has been conditioned by the relentless, monotonous rhythm of the scribe's work. The sheer impossibility of the content is counteracted by the sheer mundanity of its presentation. The text does not ask for belief. It simply presents its data, entry after entry, with the quiet confidence of an official record that has been meticulously maintained. Pause for a moment. Observe the space you are in. Note the time on the clock, the quality of the light, the specific character of the silence. This is the state of mind required to engage with such a document. A state of quiet, focused observation, free from the noise of interpretation. If you wish, make a small record of your own. The hour, the place, a simple administrative act of marking a point in time. This is the ritual of the archivist, the scribe. It is an act of bearing witness not to an event, but to the record of an event. It is an acknowledgement of the profound stillness that surrounds these ancient accounts. The King List is not the only document that speaks of this strange, formative period. Other texts describe the arrival of foundational knowledge from an external source. The Chronicles speak of the Apkallu, 7 sages who emerged from the Persian Gulf in the time of the first kings. They are not described as gods, but as teachers or advisors. The records state they were sent to teach humanity the essential elements of civilization, what the Sumerians called the Me, the fundamental principles of order, law, craft, and ceremony. Their arrival is noted as a specific historical event, a programmed intervention designed to establish a functioning society. The knowledge they brought was comprehensive and systematic. According to the texts, they delivered the arts of writing, the principles of law and justice, the techniques of architecture and city planning, and the methods of agriculture. This is not presented as a slow process of discovery or a divine gift bestowed out of benevolence. It is framed as a curriculum, a deliberate and structured transfer of a complete operational toolkit for civilization. The Apkallu were instructors, and humanity was their student. The texts are less concerned with the miraculous nature of this event than with the content of the information that was delivered, listing the specific skills and social structures that were implemented. One can almost see the researcher in the archive, pausing over this detail. The archaeological record itself reflects this suddenness. In Mesopotamia, complex urban society, monumental architecture, and administrative writing do not show a long, gradual evolution. They appear in the record almost fully formed, a sudden leap in complexity and organization. There is no long runway of primitive trial and error. The system seems to have been switched on. This physical evidence in the soil mirrors the story in the texts. Civilization was not so much developed as it was installed, a prepackaged system brought online according to a clear and deliberate plan. These Apkallu are explicitly linked to the pre-Diluvian kings. They are listed as the advisors to these long-reigning rulers. This places the transfer of knowledge squarely within that first impossible epoch of 241-200 years. The function of these kings then appears less like that of human monarchs, and more like that of overseers or project managers tasked with supervising the implementation of this new civilizational software. Their unimaginably long reigns suggest a different kind of being, a different role, one suited to the long, slow work of establishing a planetary system from the ground up, guided by the technical expertise of these external advisors. Another text, the Atrahasis epic, provides a colder, more functional context for this entire period. It addresses the fundamental question of why humanity was created in the first place. The text frames it not as a divine act of love or a cosmological necessity, but as a solution to a labor problem. It speaks of a time when the junior gods, the Igigi, were tasked with the immense physical labor of maintaining the world's infrastructure, specifically digging the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and maintaining the canals. This was not sacred work. It was grueling, manual toil, and the record states that the Igigi eventually refused to continue. The tablet records their protest with the precision of court minutes. For 40 years, night and day, they bore the work. The text describes how they burned their tools and surrounded the temple of their chief administrator, Enlil, demanding relief from their burden. The situation is presented as a full-blown labor strike, a crisis in the administrative hierarchy that threatened to halt the entire operation. The Senior Council of the Anunnaki convenes an emergency meeting, not to pass moral judgment, but to solve a logistical impasse. The problem is simple. The work must be done, but the designated workforce is in revolt. The solution, proposed by the chief engineer Enki, is to create a substitute. A primitive worker, the Lulu Amalu, would be designed and manufactured for the express purpose of bearing the load of the gods. Humanity's creation is thus framed as an act of applied engineering and labor management. Our species was brought into existence to serve a specific, functional role within a pre-existing economic and political system. The scribe who recorded this was not crafting a spiritual allegory. He was documenting the official, institutional history of a personnel decision that had profound and lasting consequences for the entire planetary administration. Back in the primary ledger of the king list, the chain of custody continues its inexorable march toward the great dividing line. Then Sipar was defeated, and the kingship was taken to Shurupak, the final city of the pre-Diluvian era. Here, one king is named, Ubara Tutu. His reign is recorded as 18,600 years, 5 SARS. With this entry, the first section of the list is complete. The scribe, with his unwavering administrative discipline, has now accounted for the entire period from the initial descent of kingship from heaven to the moment just before the system was fundamentally reset. The scribe then performs his final calculation for the epoch. He tallies the entire record: 8 kings, 5 cities, a total duration of 241 years. The number is presented as a simple fact, the result of careful addition, the grand total at the bottom of a long and detailed accounting sheet. There is no celebration of this immense period of stability, no lament for its passing. There is only the number itself, a final, cold testament to a world that operated on a scale of time we cannot comprehend. And immediately following this grand total, the scribe makes his next entry, a single, stark line that serves as both an end and a beginning. Then the flood swept over. The silence that followed the flood in the Mesopotamian records is not an ending. It is a seam, a point where one reality was stitched onto another. To understand the nature of that seam, one must leave the archives of Sumer and travel west, across deserts and seas, into the dust of another, equally ancient world. The air in this new archive is different. It smells not of baked clay, but of dry papyrus and limestone dust. We are in the shadow of Egypt, and before us lies the work of another scribe, another keeper of the official record. His name was Manetho, a priest of the 3rd century BCE, tasked by the new Greek rulers, the Ptolemies, with a monumental project to compile the entire, unbroken history of his land's rulers into a single authoritative chronicle. His work, the Egyptiaca, was not intended as myth or religious scripture. Like the Sumerian king list, it was an administrative and political document, designed to demonstrate an ancient and unshakable legitimacy. Manetho had access to temple libraries and state records that have long since turned to dust, sources that reached back into the deepest foundations of Egyptian civilization. He approached his task with the methodical discipline of a historian and a bureaucrat, arranging the rulers into dynasties, a system so logical and robust that modern Egyptology still uses his framework as its backbone. He was not a storyteller. He was a compiler, a civil servant charged with organizing the state's memory into a coherent, defensible timeline for a new regime. His purpose was not to invent, but to codify what was already known and officially recorded. And here, in this separate, parallel record, compiled 1,000 miles away and 2,000 years after the first Sumerian lists were inscribed, the same impossible pattern appears. Before the first mortal pharaoh, Menes, who founded the first dynasty, Manetho's list records a long foundational period of non-human rule. He catalogues the reigns of the gods, who ruled for 13,900 years. They were followed by a dynasty of demigods, or followers of Horus, who ruled for another 11,000 years. The numbers are different, but the fundamental structure of the account is eerily familiar. An immense period of time, measured in tens of thousands of years, is meticulously documented as the reign of beings who were not human, an epoch that served as the necessary prelude to the commencement of our own history. The researcher works under the low, focused light of the archive desk. A digital scan of a Sumerian tablet lies on one screen. On another, a translation of the surviving fragments of Manetho's history, preserved in the works of later chroniclers. The physical distance between the two artifacts, the clay from Iraq and the ghost of a papyrus from Egypt, collapses into nothing. The comparison is no longer about a single anomalous document. It is about a recurring methodology, a shared protocol for how the deepest past was to be officially recorded. In two of the world's oldest and most influential civilizations, the state-sanctioned history begins not with primitive human struggles, but with a formal, orderly handover of power from a long-reigning non-human administration. The anomaly has become a pattern. The structural parallels are too precise to be dismissed as coincidence. Both records present themselves as simple lists, a succession of rulers and the duration of their authority. Both are defined by a great cataclysm or transition that separates two distinct ages of the world. In Sumer, it was the Great Flood. In Manetho's account, it is the chaotic interregnum between the rule of the demigods and the rise of Menes. And in both, this dividing line marks the exact point where the scale of time fundamentally changes. Before the break, reigns are measured in millennia. After the break, they are measured in human lifespans. It is as if two entirely different laws of physics governed the world on either side of that ancient boundary. To remain with this material, to follow the lines of evidence as they are unearthed, is to learn a different kind of seeing. It is to accept that the past is not a story that has been finished and bound, but an investigation that is still ongoing. Those who continue to watch, who stay in this quiet space as the fragments are laid out, are not here for simple answers. They are here because they recognize the shape of a profound and persistent question. To acknowledge the pattern is to become part of a long tradition of quiet observation, a vigil kept for centuries by those who suspected the official story was incomplete. This is not a search for belief, but for a deeper understanding of the records we have inherited. The pattern, however, is not confined to ancient texts. It is carved into the earth itself, in stone. We move from the archive to the field. An archaeologist kneels at the foundation of a temple, not with a brush, but with a laser scanner. The work is slow, patient, a methodical gathering of data points. The device emits a low hum, its beam tracing the contours of a granite block, measuring its dimensions, its weight, its position relative to the stars. The goal is not to unearth a single artifact, but to understand the logic of the construction itself. It is a forensic analysis of an engineering problem solved on a scale that remains, in many ways, beyond our own capabilities. The stones themselves are a record, a ledger of technical knowledge. Consider the foundation platform of the temple at Baalbek in modern Lebanon. Beneath the Roman-era structure lie three colossal limestone blocks known as the trilithon. Each one is estimated to weigh around 800 tons. They were quarried, transported over a mile, and lifted into place with a precision that would challenge the most advanced heavy crane technology available today. The local traditions, recorded long before the Romans arrived, attribute the construction of this foundation not to humans, but to a race of giants under the command of a divine ruler. The physical evidence on the ground presents a technical impossibility that mirrors the chronological impossibilities in the textual records. The how of the stones is as inexplicable as the how long of the rains. This sudden appearance of impossibly advanced engineering is a recurring signature. In Egypt, the precision of the Great Pyramid's construction, its near-perfect alignment to true north, its complex internal structure, the cutting and placement of its 3 million stone blocks, emerges in the record without a clear developmental period. There are no preliminary pyramids showing a gradual learning curve. The most magnificent and sophisticated of them all is among the very first. It is the same pattern seen in Sumer, with the sudden appearance of writing and law. It is not evolution, it is implementation. A complete high-level system switched on, fully operational from the outset, as if a pre-existing template was simply put into effect. The investigation moves from the earth to the sky. In the archive, late at night, the researcher overlays ancient celestial maps onto the surveyed layouts of temple complexes. The patterns that emerge are not random. They reveal a profound and sustained focus on the slow, grand movements of the cosmos. The temples are not just places of worship. They are astronomical observatories, clocks designed to measure time on a scale far beyond the human. They are oriented to the solstices and equinoxes, to the rising of specific stars, and most importantly, to the 25-9-20-year cycle of precessional wobble of the Earth's axis. This is not the time of farmers and harvests. It is the time of world ages. This preoccupation with vast celestial cycles is encoded into the very architecture of antiquity. From the stone circles of Europe to the temple complexes of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, the structures function as silent, enduring instruments for tracking the deep time of the cosmos. Their builders were not just observing the sky, they were embedding their knowledge of its long-term mechanics into the most permanent materials they could find. This perspective, one that measures existence in units of tens of thousands of years, is fundamentally alien to the concerns of early, struggling human societies. It resonates, however, with perfect clarity with the timelines presented by the Sumerian and Egyptian scribes. The worldview of the builders matches the worldview of the record keepers. Now, the search must take a leap across the world, to a place that should have no connection to the histories of the Near East. We are in the thin, cold air of the Bolivian Altiplano, at an altitude of 13,000 feet. Before us lie the ruins of Puma Punku, a site so strange and so precise it seems to defy its own existence. A researcher's gloved hand, careful against the biting wind, traces the edge of a diorite H-block. The stone is one of the hardest on Earth, yet it has been cut with the precision of a modern laser, with clean right angles, perfectly flat planes, and complex interlocking joints. The technology required to achieve this is absent from the archaeological record of the Americas. The site is a collection of shattered, impossibly engineered components. There are blocks with perfectly drilled holes, intricate interior corners, and channels cut to millimeter accuracy. The official narrative attributes this work to the Tiwanaku culture, predecessors of the Inca. Yet the local Aymara traditions, much like those in Lebanon and Egypt, insist that the site was not built by their ancestors. They state it was constructed in a single night by giants, or that it was built by the gods to serve as a landing place. The physical evidence of a lost, high technology sits in the same landscape as a cultural memory of non-human founders. The pattern, the signature of this lost chapter, has appeared again, thousands of miles from its origin point. What does it mean when the stones on a high plateau in South America seem to corroborate the administrative records of a scribe in ancient Mesopotamia? The inquiry is no longer about a single culture or a single text. It has become global. The researcher's desk is now a constellation of these disparate points of light. A photograph of an H-block from Puma Punku, a printout of Manetho's dynastic list, a diagram showing the celestial alignment of a ziggurat, a translation of a Sumerian tablet describing the duties of the Anunnaki. Seen individually, they are anomalies, curiosities for specialists to debate. But when placed side by side, they cease to be isolated data points. They become a mosaic. The emerging picture suggests a single, coherent event in the deep past. A globally active civilization with a mastery of advanced engineering, a profound understanding of cosmic cycles, and a highly structured administrative system seems to have been in operation. The records suggest this civilization was not human. Instead, it appears to have established the foundational infrastructure of what would later become human society. They laid out the templates for law, for kingship, for architecture, and for the measurement of time. Then, for reasons that remain shrouded in silence, they withdrew, leaving behind their structures and their records. Back in the primary archive, a single clay tablet rests under the lamp. It is just one piece of the puzzle, but it now sits within a much larger context. The numbers carved into its surface, once so alien and unbelievable, now feel less like fantasy and more like an echo. They are part of a consistent story told not just in clay, but in stone, and in the silent alignment of ruins with the stars. The investigation has revealed a pattern that repeats across cultures, across oceans, and across millennia. The question is no longer whether this pattern exists. The question has become more personal, more direct. Who were the authors of this original design? The silence of the archive deepens. The wind outside might be blowing across the sands of Iraq, or the high plains of the Andes, or the Giza Plateau. It no longer matters. The locations have merged into a single, planetary landscape of ancient memory. The work of the researcher, the archaeologist, the scribe, all converge on this one point. A system was put in place, a foundation was laid, and the records of that transaction, though fragmented and scattered, have survived. They wait, not for belief, but for a continued patient reading. For the first time, we are beginning to see the sheer scale of the history that has been forgotten. The focus returns to the human element in this story, not the kings or the gods, but the keepers of the records themselves, the scribes. One imagines them at work, century after century in Sumer, in Egypt, in other centers yet undiscovered. Their task was not one of creation, but of preservation. They were copying older documents, ensuring the data survived the decay of its medium. They were the guardians of a memory that was already ancient in their own time. Their dispassionate, repetitive work was a sacred duty, a promise made to the past that its official account would not be lost. The patterns we now see exist only because of their discipline. They held the line against the slow, inevitable erosion of time. The records do not speak of gods. The word, as we understand it, is a later invention, a vessel for our own spiritual longings. The original Sumerian texts, the ones that lie at the foundation of all subsequent mythologies, use a different vocabulary. They speak of a ruling class, an administration. They name them the Anunnaki. The term translates not to the divine or the holy, but simply to those who from heaven to earth came. It is a description of origin, not of nature. They are presented in the earliest ledgers not as objects of worship, but as the subjects of the historical account, the founders and chief executives of the entire enterprise of civilization. Their story is not a theology, it is an organizational history. Their roles are defined by their titles, which read less like sacred epithets and more like positions on a corporate flowchart. There is Enlil, whose title often translates to Lord of the Command, the chief executive officer responsible for overall operations on the ground. His brother, Enki, is Lord of the Earth, Sali, but his function is that of a chief scientist or head of engineering, the master of technology, genetics, and resource development. Others are designated as foremen, planners, and scribes. The phrase, "the ones who decreed the fates," loses its mystical overtone when read in this context. It becomes the designation for the board of directors, the planning committee that met to set policy, allocate resources, and determine the long-term strategic objectives of their global project. The texts describe a clear, two-tiered hierarchy. At the top were the senior Anunnaki, the council of great lords who made the decisions. Below them were the Igigi, a class of junior administrators or astronauts, tasked with carrying out the heavy physical labor required by the initial settlement. The records are explicit about their duties. For thousands of years, they were the ones who dug the great river systems, who dredged the canals, who toiled in the mines of southern Africa to extract essential minerals. Their relationship with the senior Anunnaki was not that of a devotee to a god, but of a subordinate to a superior. It was a system built on labor, command, and a strict chain of authority. This system, however, was not stable. The Atrahasis epic, one of the oldest and most complete accounts, details a crisis that threatened the entire operation. After 40 periods of relentless labor, the Igigi reached a breaking point. The texts record their mutiny with the cold precision of a court document. They burned their tools, they surrounded Enlil's command post, and they refused to work. The situation is described not as a theological schism, but as a full-scale labor strike. The crisis was logistical. The work had to continue, but the designated workforce was in open revolt. The problem was not one of sin or disobedience, but of an unsustainable labor model that had finally collapsed under its own weight. The solution proposed by Enki, the chief engineer, was not to appease or punish the strikers, but to create a replacement. The official records frame the creation of humanity as an act of applied biological engineering designed to solve this specific labor shortage. A new being, a primitive worker designated as the Lulu Amilu, would be designed. Its purpose was explicit and singular: to bear the load of the gods, to take over the grueling physical tasks that the Igigi would no longer perform. This was not a miraculous birth of a cherished species. It was the calculated production of a new piece of biological machinery, a subordinate class created for the sole purpose of serving the economic and logistical needs of the existing administration. Our function, then, was defined before our existence. According to these foundational texts, humanity was brought into being to work. The early lists of human duties are not spiritual commandments. They are work orders. Maintain the canals, till the fields, operate the mines, provide the sustenance required to keep the Anunnaki settlements running. We were designed to be the hands of their enterprise, a buffer class that would allow the higher echelons of the administration to focus on more important matters. The relationship was not one of father and child, but of master and servant, or more accurately, of manager and employee. Our existence was a solution to a problem of infrastructure and resource management. This brings a new, colder light to the impossibly long reigns of the pre-Diluvian kings. They were not human. The texts are clear on this point. They were the appointed overseers, the first regional managers of this new human workforce. Their immense lifespans were not a feature of a mythical age, but a practical necessity for the kind of long-term project they were supervising. They were the bridge between the Anunnaki administration and the new human laborers, the on-site supervisors tasked with implementing the civilizational program and ensuring the productivity of the newly created assets. Their role was purely administrative, their reigns a measure of their tenure in a specific posting before the kingship was transferred to a new city, a new manager. Take a moment and feel the weight of this account. Not as a story, but as a record. It suggests that the deepest structures of our world, hierarchy, labor, cities, laws, are not our own invention. They are the remnants of a system we were created to serve, a system whose original architects are long gone. The silence in this room is not empty. It is filled with the resonance of this profound and unsettling possibility. The dust on these ancient tablets is not just the residue of time. It is the physical remainder of a contract whose terms we have forgotten. A story of our own origins that is far more functional and far less comforting than any we have ever told ourselves. Within this framework, the role of the Apkallu sages becomes clear. They were not mystical bringers of enlightenment. They were a technical support team, a group of specialists sent to train the new human workforce. The knowledge they brought, writing, law, architecture, agriculture, was not a gift, but a necessary software package. How could humanity perform its function without a system for tracking inventory, for organizing labor, for resolving disputes, for producing a reliable food surplus? The Apkallu were the instructors, and the curriculum they delivered was the complete operating system for a functional, productive society. Their arrival was a programmed and necessary step in the deployment of the new labor force. Civilization, then, was not something humanity slowly and painfully developed over millennia of trial and error. According to this record, it was a turnkey system, installed and brought online in a remarkably short period. The archaeological evidence itself reflects this suddenness, this great leap forward that has long puzzled historians. The Apkallu's role was to ensure that humanity was properly equipped to run the infrastructure that had already been built. They were not here to enlighten us, but to enable us to fulfill our designated role within the larger Anunnaki enterprise. The knowledge was a tool, and we were the ones now tasked with using it. The dynamic between the two primary Anunnaki leaders, Enlil and Enki, can be seen not as a mythical struggle between gods, but as a recurring conflict between two different management styles. Enlil, the commander, was concerned with order, discipline, and the strict fulfillment of production quotas. He is often depicted as harsh and unforgiving, the stern administrator of a difficult colonial outpost. Enki, the scientist and engineer, was more focused on the technical aspects of the project, on innovation, and on the assets he himself had designed, including humanity. Many of the texts record their disputes as policy disagreements within the ruling council over how to manage the human population. The very concept of decreeing the fates is transformed by this reading. The Tablet of Destinies, indeed, an object of immense power in the myths, appears less like a mystical artifact and more like the master computer or central server that held the operational plans for the entire planetary mission. To possess it was to possess the administrative codes, the strategic plans, the resource allocation charts, and the energy distribution grids. When the texts describe this tablet being stolen or fought over, it is not a story of divine drama, but an account of an internal power struggle, a corporate raid designed to seize control of the entire system by capturing its central database of operational protocols. These beings are consistently described in physical, not ethereal terms. They travel in skyboats or celestial barges, which require landing places designated as the sacred precincts of the temples. They consume physical food and drink, with the temple rituals being the descendants of the direct, material provisioning of their settlements. They hold assemblies, they debate policy, they issue commands that are written down and carried out. They are described with attributes we would later call divine: immense knowledge, advanced technology, and lifespans so long as to appear immortal. But these are presented as characteristics of their biology and their civilization, not as supernatural powers. They were administrators, not spirits. The great narrative of the pre-Diluvian world, as recorded by the scribes, is strikingly devoid of a moral dimension. Actions are not judged as good or evil, but as effective or ineffective, orderly or chaotic. The eventual decision to allow the flood to wipe out the human population is presented not as a righteous punishment for human sin, but as a cold administrative decision. The text in the Atrahasis epic states that the human population had become too numerous, and their noise was disrupting the sleep of the administrator Enlil. It was a problem of overpopulation and public disturbance, and the solution, from his perspective, was to liquidate the project and start again. After the cataclysm of the flood, a profound change occurs in the records. The direct, hands-on management by the Anunnaki ceases. They recede from the day-to-day running of the world. Kingship is once again lowered from heaven, but this time it is given to humans. This is the great moment of succession, the point at which humanity is promoted from a managed workforce to the new managers of the planetary system. The Anunnaki do not vanish entirely, but they become remote figures, a board of directors that no longer attends the daily meetings, to be honored with rituals that echo the old protocols of provisioning and reporting, but who no longer intervene directly. We are left, then, in the quiet aftermath of this transaction. The original architects of the system have withdrawn, leaving their infrastructure and their operating manual in the hands of their successors. We inherited a world that was designed for a purpose we may have never been fully meant to understand. The cities, the laws, the hierarchies, the agriculture, the very concept of kingship, all of these foundational elements may not be our own. They may simply be the tools we were given to continue a job whose original work order is now lost. The silence they left behind is not an absence of history. It is the central mystery of it. We are the caretakers of an ancient estate, walking through halls built by our predecessors, wondering at the purpose of it all. The record itself is a ruin. We do not possess a single complete copy of the Sumerian king list as it was originally compiled. What we have are fragments, shards of baked clay unearthed from the dust of a dozen different cities, each one a piece of a larger broken mirror. The work of the researcher is often not one of reading, but of reconstruction, of trying to align these broken edges to recreate a text that is whole. But the gaps remain. Some are the simple wounds of time, a crack that obscures a king's name, a worn surface that makes a number illegible. But other gaps feel different. They feel deliberate. There are entire sections, spanning centuries of the official timeline, for which no record has ever been found. The silence here is not an accident of preservation. It feels like a feature of the original document. The archaeologist sees this same silence in the earth. As one excavates a site like Eridu or Uruk, one moves downwards through time, layer by layer. Each stratum tells a story. A layer of dark, rich soil speaks of a long period of peaceful habitation. A layer of ash and rubble indicates a sudden, violent destruction. But between these layers of activity, there are often thick, sterile bands of wind-blown sand or water-laid silt. These are layers of absence, periods where the city seems to have been simply empty, abandoned for generations or even centuries before being reoccupied. There is no record of why. The texts do not speak of a great plague or a famine. The city just stops. The hum of civilization is switched off, and for a long time, there is only the sound of the wind. Then, just as inexplicably, it is switched back on. This pattern of interruption is mirrored in the great administrative documents themselves. The King List records the transfer of authority with a stark, brutal efficiency. Then Eridu was defeated, and the kingship was taken to Bad Tibira. The statement is absolute, but it is also a void. It tells us the outcome, but it erases the event. What was the nature of this defeat? Was it a war, a political collapse, an economic failure? Were there battles, treaties, refugees? The scribe, whose duty it is to record the continuity of power, is utterly silent on the discontinuities that make it possible. The violence, the chaos, the human cost of these transfers of power are systematically omitted from the official ledger. The history is written between the lines, in a silence that is as structured and deliberate as the script itself. This institutional silence is not limited to the transfer of power between cities. It extends to the very nature of the rulers themselves. The pre-Diluvian kings are given names and reign lengths, but nothing else. We are told nothing of their deeds, their character, their accomplishments. They exist in the record as placeholders for vast stretches of time. Their entire existence is compressed into a single line in a ledger. This is not the way humans remember their great leaders. Our histories, even the most ancient, are filled with stories of heroism, of folly, of personality. The silence of the King List on the nature of its first rulers is profound. It suggests they were not remembered as people, but were recorded as functions, as components in a system whose human details were deemed irrelevant to the official account. The ultimate expression of this structured forgetting is the flood. It is the great wall in the timeline, the point beyond which the old world becomes inaccessible. But the King List does not describe it as a mythological event. It records it as an administrative boundary. Then the flood swept over. The line is a finality, a closing of the books on the previous epoch. It is an act of erasure on a planetary scale. Everything that came before, the 200 years of recorded history, the nature of the cities, the technology, the society, the full operational details of the Anunnaki administration, is wiped clean. The record does not say what was lost. It only marks the moment of its loss. The flood is not the story. It is the silence where the most important part of the story used to be. One feels the presence of this invisible antagonist most keenly in these moments. It is not a force of chaos, but a force of order, an agent of meticulous erasure. It does not destroy the records. It curates them, removing whatever is deemed unnecessary, leaving behind a clean, sparse, and profoundly misleading account. It is the silence of a redacted document, where the black lines covering the text are more significant than the words left visible. This force is the true ruler of the ancient world, for it is the one that decided what would be remembered and what would be consigned to an absolute and permanent void. Its work is so complete that we, millennia later, are still grappling with the shape of the questions it refused to allow. The physical layers of the Earth confirm this pattern of sudden, unexplained breaks. An archaeologist working at a specific dig site might find a layer representing a highly advanced culture, with sophisticated pottery and metallurgy. Directly on top of it, with no transitional phase, they might find a layer from a far more primitive culture, as if the clock of progress was suddenly and violently wound back. There is no evidence of a gradual decline. The superior technology, the knowledge, the artistry, it simply vanishes from the record, to be replaced by something cruder, less refined. It is as if a light was turned off, and the inhabitants were left to start again in the dark, with only a fragmented memory of the world that came before. This is not the normal rhythm of historical decay. Civilizations do not typically forget how to make better tools or build stronger walls. Knowledge is accretive. It builds upon itself. Yet the record in Mesopotamia, and indeed in other parts of the ancient world, shows repeated instances of these technological resets, These cultural amnesias. The invisible antagonist is not just erasing text from a tablet. It is erasing knowledge from the human mind. It is a force that prunes the tree of history, cutting away the highest branches and forcing it to regrow from a much lower point. This process of managed decline, of enforced forgetting, is the repeating signature of this silent, overseeing power. Consider the silence between the end of the Anunnaki's direct rule and the beginning of human kingship. The texts present it as a simple handover, a change in management. But they are silent on the transition itself. Was there a period of training? Was there a rebellion? Was there a slow, planned withdrawal? The record is blank. One administration, characterized by lifespans of millennia and impossibly advanced capabilities, ceases its direct operations. Another, the human one, begins. The seam between these two realities is unstitched. We are given the before and the after, but the moment of transfer, the most critical event in our species' history, has been surgically removed from the account. Let us pause now, in this space created by a missing record. Feel the quiet in the room you are in. It is not an emptiness. It is a container for what is unspoken. This is the state in which the deepest research is done. Not in the noise of discovery, but in the sustained contemplation of a gap. The truth of our history may not lie in the symbols we can read, but in the calculated spaces between them. The story is told by the missing pieces. If you are watching this in a quiet place, take a moment to contribute to a different kind of record. In the comments below, do not write a message. Simply leave a timestamp of the moment you are experiencing this silence. Let us create a silent archive of our own, a list of moments dedicated to the great, unwritten chapters of our past. It will be our own small act of defiance against the force of erasure. The knowledge of the Apkallu, the seven sages, is another facet of this mystery. The texts tell us what they taught: writing, law, architecture. But they are silent on who the Apkallu were. They emerge from the waters, deliver a complete civilizational package, and then they disappear from the record. They are a delivery mechanism, a function without a history. Where did they come from? Where did they go? The scribe records their curriculum, but he erases their identity. They are presented as a fact without a context, a solution without an origin. Their presence in our history as sudden and as unexplained as their departure. The silence that surrounds them is as profound as the knowledge they are said to have brought. This pattern of deliberate omission suggests that the records we have were not meant for us. They were internal documents, created by an administration for its own purposes. They were not designed to explain the system to outsiders. They were designed to run it. A modern corporate ledger does not explain the history of capitalism or the ethics of its business practices. It simply records transactions. The Sumerian records function in the same way. The scribes were not writing a history for the future. They were maintaining the operational files of the present. The great foundational questions we have, the why and the how, were never part of the required data set. They were edited out by the brutal pragmatism of a working bureaucracy. The very survival of these tablets is a paradox. They are made of baked clay, a fragile medium. They have survived conquests, the burning of cities, the collapse of empires, and the slow, grinding passage of 4,000 years. Yet more durable records, written on stone or metal, have vanished. It is as if these specific administrative accounts were meant to survive, while other, perhaps more revealing, histories were not. Is it possible that the survival of the king list and its associated ledgers is not an accident, that these documents were preserved precisely because of what they omit? They provide a thread of continuity, a proof of legitimate succession, while carefully avoiding any of the dangerous details of the system's true origin and purpose. The work of the invisible antagonist is one of insulation. It has placed a layer of silence between us and the operational reality of the pre-Diluvian world. It has left us with the titles, the durations, and the sequence of events, but it has stripped away the meaning. We are like employees in a vast ancient corporation who have been given access to the company's list of former CEOs, but have been locked out of the boardroom minutes, the strategic plans, and the mission statement. We can trace the chain of command, but we have no idea what the company was actually trying to achieve. The silence is a firewall, preventing us from accessing the source code of our own civilization. This silence is not passive. It is an active, shaping force. It is what has allowed the story of our origins to be rewritten as myth. Without the cold, administrative details, the Anunnaki could be transformed into gods, their technology into magic, and their labor disputes into epic battles between good and evil. The erasure of the functional context was a necessary precondition for the creation of religion as we know it. The antagonist did not just remove information. It created the empty space required for a new and perhaps more controllable narrative to be born. The silence was the fertile ground in which our current story of ourselves was planted. Even the landscape itself participates in this erasure. The wind and sand of the Iraqi desert are constantly at work, burying the ancient cities, smoothing their sharp edges, returning them to the indistinct flatness of the plain. To stand there is to witness this slow, indifferent act of forgetting in progress. The earth is reclaiming the record. The archaeologist's work is a race against this entropy, a temporary reversal of a process of concealment that has been underway for millennia. Every tablet pulled from the ground is a victory, but it is a victory that only highlights the scale of what has already been lost to the silence of the soil. Ultimately, we are left alone in the archive, surrounded by these fragments. The low light illuminates the wedge-shaped marks on the clay, a language that has been silent for longer than it ever spoke. And we begin to understand that the story is not in the tablet we are holding. It is in the one that is missing from the shelf next to it. It is in the column of text that was broken off and lost forever. It is in the untranslatable word that holds a concept we no longer possess. The history of our world is a ghost, a presence defined not by what is there, but by the precise and terrifying shape of what has been taken away. The silence is the final, and perhaps the only authentic record. The fragments no longer lie in isolation. When the clay tablets from Sumer are placed alongside the papyrus chronicles of Egypt, a disturbing coherence begins to emerge. These are not the scattered, contradictory myths of primitive peoples struggling to explain the thunder. They are the state-sanctioned administrative histories of the world's two foundational civilizations, and in their deepest grammar, they tell the same story. They speak of a world whose governance was established and managed for an immense period of time by a non-human authority, before being formally transferred to mankind. This is not an anomaly found in a single strange document. It is the official, institutional memory of how our own age began, recorded in parallel by cultures separated by 1,000 miles of desert and 1,000 years of history. It is the baseline narrative of the ancient world. This textual record does not stand alone. It is anchored in the earth by a second, equally unsettling, layer of evidence. The stones. The impossible engineering at Baalbek. The inexplicable precision of Pumapunku, the mathematical and astronomical mastery encoded in the Giza Plateau. These are not just isolated wonders. They are the physical signature of the same administration described in the texts. The technical capability required to quarry, transport, and assemble these structures is as far beyond the accepted timeline of human development as the 800-year reign of a Sumerian king. The stones and the tablets are two copies of the same ledger. One records the duration of the project in units of time. The other records its technical specifications in units of mass and dimension. Both speak of a capacity that was not our own. The pattern, once seen, becomes visible everywhere. It is not a regional phenomenon confined to the Near East. It is a planetary blueprint. The same foundational story, of civilizing instructors who arrive from elsewhere, of impossibly ancient timelines, of a cataclysm that resets the world, and of a subsequent transfer of knowledge or authority to humanity, appears in the bedrock traditions of cultures across the globe. From the high Andes to the plains of India, from the jungles of Southeast Asia to the myths of the Hopi in North America, the echo of this original event persists. The consistency of the narrative structure, across vast and disconnected geographies, suggests we are not looking at the independent inventions of scattered tribes. We are looking at the fragmented, localized memories of a single, coordinated global event. This brings us back to the central figures in that event, the Anunnaki. By stripping away the layers of myth and religious interpretation that have accumulated over millennia, we can begin to see them as the original records intended. They were not gods. They were an executive body, a corporate hierarchy, a colonial administration. Their concerns were not with the moral state of humanity's soul, but with the material output of their global enterprise. They were concerned with mineral resources, agricultural yields, and the management of their workforce. The creation of humanity itself, as recorded in their own chronicles, was a pragmatic solution to a labor shortage. This cold, functional reality is the key. It reframes the entire story of our origins from one of divine creation to one of industrial production. The consistent theme, therefore, is not one of revelation, but of succession. A system was designed and built. It was operated for a period of time so vast it defies our historical imagination. And then, for reasons that are never made explicit in the surviving records, a decision was made to transfer the management of that system. This was not a slow, organic process of humanity rising to take control. It was a formal handover. The texts are unambiguous on this point. After the flood, kingship was once again lowered from heaven, but this time it was given to human rulers. We were promoted from laborers to supervisors. The great, unasked question is not whether this succession took place, but what its terms and conditions were. What, precisely, was the asset being transferred? It was not simply a crown or a title. The inheritance was the entire operational infrastructure of civilization. It was the knowledge of writing and law, necessary for administration. It was the science of agriculture and irrigation, necessary for provisioning. It was the principles of architecture and urban planning, necessary for housing the workforce, and it was the complex, astronomical, and calendrical knowledge required to measure time on a scale appropriate to the system's long-term cycles. Humanity did not invent these things. The records suggest we were bequeathed them, a complete turnkey package for the continued management of a pre-existing global enterprise. We were not the authors of the civilizational project. We were its designated heirs. This forces a far larger and more unsettling question into view. Why was this planetary system established in the first place? The texts are filled with clues that point toward a purpose that was both pragmatic and deeply alien to our own concerns. They speak of mining operations, of the processing of rare minerals, of the need to establish a stable, productive outpost. They describe the Earth not as a sacred home, but as a functional asset, a resource to be managed and exploited according to a long-term strategic plan. The sheer scale of the timeline, the obsession with cosmic cycles, and the immense engineering projects all suggest that the enterprise was not an end in itself. This planet was a component in a much larger system, a single node in an interstellar network whose full scope remains entirely outside our field of vision. Within this framework, our own species' role becomes profoundly recontextualized. We were not the inevitable pinnacle of a long evolutionary process. We were a late-stage addition to an ongoing project. According to the records, we were brought into existence, or at least significantly modified, to serve a specific function within that project. Our history does not begin with our own struggles in the primordial wilderness. It begins the moment we were integrated into this pre-existing administrative and economic structure. Our deepest cultural memories are not of our own birth, but of the moment we reported for our first day of work. We are not the original inhabitants of this world's story. We are the supporting cast. The silence that pervades the record now takes on a new and more sinister character. The gaps, the missing tablets, the sudden breaks in the timeline, they no longer feel like the random accidents of time. They feel like a deliberate and systematic redaction. The most critical pieces of information have been surgically removed from the account. The full details of the Anunnaki's own origins and motivations, the precise nature of the technology they used, the full terms of the agreement by which humanity inherited the Earth, all of this is missing. It is as if the new managers were given the operational manual for the factory, but the chapter explaining who the owners are and what the factory ultimately produces was torn out. Why would a record be so meticulously curated to exclude its most vital information? An act of such profound censorship implies that the redacted knowledge was considered dangerous. Perhaps it was to prevent the new managers from aspiring to the level of their predecessors. Or perhaps it was to conceal a fundamental flaw, a hidden debt, or an ongoing liability in the system they were inheriting. The silence is not a void. It is a carefully drawn boundary. It is a firewall erected between us and the source code of our own reality. The great, invisible antagonist is not the decay of time, but the hand of an ancient editor, whose purpose was to ensure that we would only ever know half of the story. The investigation we are conducting here is not one that will end in a single discovery. It is a slow, patient process of learning to read the shape of what is missing. It is a vigil, kept in the quiet archives of a world that has forgotten its own origins. To continue this work is to accept that the most profound truths are not found in loud revelations, but in the sustained contemplation of a structured silence. This journey does not promise answers. It only promises a deeper and more honest engagement with the question itself. If you wish to remain in this space, to continue this watch, know that you are part of a long and quiet tradition of seeing. If this account is even partially true, it means that the very foundations of our world are not our own. We are living within the decaying architecture of a system we did not build and do not fully understand. Our laws, our social hierarchies, our economic models, our religions, our ceaseless drive to exploit the planet's resources, are these the products of our own free will and cultural evolution? Or are they simply the echoes of the original operating system, the ghost of a program we are still unconsciously executing long after its original purpose has been forgotten? The implication is that we may not be as free as we believe. We may still be bound by the terms of an ancient contract we have never been allowed to read. The question then extends from the past into the immediate present. If our species was brought into being to serve a function, does that function still remain? Are we, in our modern globalized civilization, merely continuing the original work order on a more efficient and destructive scale? Our planetary system of extraction, production, and consumption, managed by a small global elite and powered by the labor of billions, is this a new creation, or is it simply the latest, most advanced iteration of the same model established in Sumer thousands of years ago? The unsettling possibility is that our history has not been a journey toward enlightenment, but a relentless and increasingly efficient optimization of our original programmed purpose. And where are the original architects? The records describe their withdrawal from direct, hands-on management, not their complete departure. They receded, becoming a remote authority, a board of directors that no longer attends the daily operational meetings, but may still be watching the quarterly reports. This is perhaps the most profound silence of all, the silence of the overseers. Have they simply lost interest in a project that is now running itself? Or are they waiting for a specific point in a long cosmic cycle, for a debt to come due, for the terms of the original succession to reach their appointed conclusion? The silence from above is not necessarily one of absence. It could be the silence of patient observation. We are left with a final, chilling image. Humanity as the inheritor of a vast and powerful machine, the keys to which were placed in our hands without a full instruction manual. For millennia, we have been living in this complex, turning its dials, pulling its levers, marveling at the outputs, all without any real comprehension of its ultimate design or function. We have learned to operate the system for our own short-term benefit, treating it as a home, a playground, a battlefield. But we have never stopped to consider the possibility that the machine is still running its original program, that it is still connected to its creators, and that its purpose may have very little to do with us at all. The nature of the mystery has therefore transformed. It is no longer a simple historical inquiry into the strange beliefs of an ancient people. It has become an investigation into the very nature of our own reality. The question is not simply what happened in the deep past, but how that past continues to shape and define our present. The Sumerian scribe, with his dispassionate record of impossible reigns, did not leave us with a myth. He left us with a user agreement, a statement of succession, the opening clauses of a contract that governs our world to this day. And the most terrifying implication is this: we are a party to that contract, and we have no idea what we agreed to. The journey does not end in a library of answers. It ends here, where it began. In the low, warm light of a single desk lamp, in a room far from the noise of the world. The air is still, heavy with the scent of old paper and sterilized dust. Before us, on a bed of dark velvet, rests the object, the fragment of baked clay. It has not changed. It has offered up all the data it contains, but it has surrendered none of its secrets. The numbers are still there, etched with a bureaucrat's steady hand. The names of the kings, the cities, the impossible spans of time. They have been read, catalogued, and compared. And now, in the silence that follows the final line of inquiry, they simply exist. The object has become a mirror, and the question it reflects is our own. The work of the researcher is done for the night. The digital scans are saved. The reference books are closed. All that remains is the quiet act of observation, a vigil kept with this small, impossibly heavy piece of the past. The light from the lamp pools on its surface, catching the sharp edges of the cuneiform wedges, filling the shallow depressions with shadow. One can trace the path of a crack that runs from the edge to the center, a wound inflicted by the slow, indifferent violence of the earth. It is a fracture in the record itself, a physical manifestation of the gaps in the story. It is a reminder that what we hold is not a complete history, but a single, surviving piece from a much larger, shattered whole. To stay with it is to feel the immense weight of the time that separates us from the hand that made it. That hand, holding a sharpened reed, moved with a purpose we can now only guess at. Was the scribe aware of the impossible nature of the data he was transcribing? Or was it, to him, a simple and unremarkable fact, a routine entry in a long-established ledger? The silence of the tablet is his silence. He did not feel the need to explain, to justify, to soften the numbers for a future audience. He simply did his work. He recorded the account as it was given to him, a link in a chain of transmission that stretches back into a darkness we cannot penetrate. We are at the other end of that chain, holding the last, broken link. The focus narrows until all that is visible is a single wedge-shaped mark. The foundational unit of a written language, the atom of recorded history. It is a simple impression in clay, a technology of memory. Yet this single mark, repeated and arranged, built the empires of the ancient world. It carried the law, it tracked the harvest, it recorded the movement of the stars, and it carried a history that seems to defy the very world it helped to create. This small triangular impression is the point of entry into the entire mystery. It is the beginning of the text, the start of the inquiry. And now, at the end, It is all that remains. An elegant, abstract symbol whose full context has been lost to the great silence. The light on the tablet seems to grow warmer, softer. The hum of the climate control system fades into the background, becoming a part of the quiet. The room itself feels less like a laboratory and more like a sanctuary, a space set apart for the contemplation of a single difficult relic. The questions that drove the investigation, who were they? What did they build? Why did they leave? Have not been answered. They have simply deepened, their echoes resonating in the space between the evidence and our understanding. The search for a conclusion has given way to the simple act of being present with the artifact, of acknowledging its profound and persistent strangeness. One does not solve such a mystery. One learns to live with it. It becomes a part of the architecture of one's own mind, a quiet room in which this tablet always rests under its single, steady light. It is a permanent reminder that the story we have been told about our past is incomplete, that the foundations of our world may be sunk into a history far deeper and more alien than we have ever allowed ourselves to imagine. The tablet does not offer a new history. It challenges the very idea that we have ever known our own. It is a piece of evidence that suggests the most important chapters of our biography were written before we were born, and that the language they were written in is one we have yet to relearn. The narrator does not have the final word. The final word belongs to the object itself, and its language is silence. My role was only to curate the approach, to clear the path so that you could stand before it without the distraction of noise, to hold the lamp steady while you looked. The rest of the work is not one of analysis, but of attention. It is the long, patient work of listening to what is not said, of reading the spaces between the words, of feeling the weight of the questions that have been left in the room. The journey was not to an answer, but to this quiet, contemplative threshold. Now, the light in the archive begins to dim. The room recedes, the details of the desk and the shelves dissolving into a gentle darkness. The tablet itself holds the light for a moment longer, a small, warm rectangle of inscribed earth, before it too is reclaimed by the shadows. The specific location no longer matters. The archive could be anywhere. It is a state of mind, a place of quiet focus that one can carry out into the world. The physical journey ends, but the internal one continues, powered now by the resonance of a single, unanswered question. The scene dissolves, not to black, but to a vast and open space. The sun has set over the plains of southern Iraq. The air is cool and thin, and a wind moves silently across the sand, carrying with it the dust of crumbled ziggurats and forgotten cities. Above, in a sky of impossible clarity, the stars are beginning to appear. They are the same stars that the Sumerian scribes watched, the same points of light they used to measure the grand, slow cycles of their world. They are the silent, eternal witnesses to the entire story. Here, in the deep twilight, the low, eroded mounds that mark the sites of Eridu and Uruk are just faint disturbances in the flatness of the earth. They are ghosts of structures, memories held in the soil. There is no sound but the whisper of the wind, no movement but the slow turning of the galaxy overhead. This is the land where the kingship first descended from heaven, the stage on which that immense, forgotten history played out. And now, it is a landscape of profound and patient silence. The silence here is not an absence. It is a presence. It is composed of the accumulated weight of all that has been lost, of the stories that were never recorded, of the names that have been erased by the wind. It is the silence of the managers who have long since departed, leaving their infrastructure to be slowly reclaimed by the planet they once administered. It is the silence that holds the beginning of our own history, a beginning that is not a creation, but a succession. We are the inheritors of this quiet and of the mystery it protects. The camera does not move. It simply watches. It holds on the landscape as the last light drains from the western horizon and the darkness becomes complete. The mounds of the ancient cities are no longer visible, having merged fully with the surrounding night. All that is left is the earth below and the stars above, the two halves of a record whose connecting text is missing. The great, foundational question of our origins hangs in the space between them, unspoken, unanswered, and undiminished. There is nothing more to say. There is only the watching. The wind blows. The dust settles. The stars continue their slow, silent procession across the vault of the sky. The vigil continues. The screen holds on the starfield for a long, unbroken moment. Then, slowly, it fades to black, and the silence remains.